What is the key to get higher paying clients in such a competitive industry?
It's the sales system. It's how you show up. The 5 things that you must know. Let's start out with, we must understand the difference between markup and margin. So let's get into the 7 common mistakes we're going to need to avoid. We need it as a cost of goods. It's a direct cost to that project. So we have to be charging project management. Gross profit is extremely important, but net profit is what we can put in our pocket eventually. This 4X will give you a 10X return, and we decrease those overhead expenses during that same month where we increase the amount of work we did. Magic starts to happen. Now you can afford the people. A players will take your business to another level. And so that's where we get this 4 to 10X.
Pricing Mastery Simplified, the 5 things you must know, 7 mistakes to avoid, and the only 4 ways to increase profit.
Pricing Mastery Simplified, let's get into it. We'll start a little bit just so you have a bit of a background of who 4-Level Coach is. We work primarily with builders and remodelers doing between $1 million and $10 million. We also have a program for guys that are under $1 million, but what we're really here to do is help you grow and scale. Webinar that we're presenting for you today is going to be about these 5 things you must know, the 7 common mistakes, and the only 4 ways to increase profit. The 5 things that you must know, let's start out with number 1. We must understand the difference between markup and margin. And if you're hearing this for the first time, big light bulbs go off and go, uh-oh, maybe I've been pricing things without thinking about margins and markups and what the difference was. So at the end of the day, the difference of markup and margin, we're going to have this calculator. This is, again, one of your bonuses, is just this calculator so that you understand if I mark up my project, my cost of a job by, we'll just use this line of 30%. If I mark it up 30%, it's the actual margin that we're going to get out is 23.08%. Now, markup is on our cost, and margin is our gross profit that we hope to get at the outset of the project. The gross profit that comes, and it's a percentage of the revenue. That revenue is a higher number than our cost that we marked up, and therefore our percentage becomes lower. So we're not getting a 30% margin when we have a markup of 30%. We're getting a 23.08% margin. Starting to think about your business in terms of percentages. Percentages are going to become absolutely critical. If I shift one thing in you today, it's the mindset that we need to understand our percentages and not so much the dollar amounts. The dollar amounts are also critical, but the percentages is what we can affect. The percentages is what we can affect in every action we take in our business day to day. The decisions we make affect our percentages. So that's something we have to get straight. Let's move on to number 2. What else do we have to know? We have to know how to read and understand a P&L. You know, we start with our sale. Well, our top line is our sales or our revenue. Well, our bottom line is our net profit. What you take home after all expenses, sales minus our cost of goods, the cost of doing the job. We minus that out, we're left with a gross profit. That gross profit is what we're left with to pay the overhead expenses in our business. And this number becomes critically important. That 12% is a critical number which we must know. And the other percent we must know is that gross profit percent. And these two tied together will tell us what our gross or our bottom line net profit is, right? So often we hear the term and we throw out, hey, you know, I got a profit of X. And then I ask, well, what kind of profit is that? Is that gross profit or net profit? Third thing that we must know is what our monthly costs of overhead or operating expenses are. Now, if we understand and know that number, we can understand how that relates as a percentage back to our sales. It tells us a lot about our business. And if we're not tracking any of these numbers, we don't understand. If we don't look at P&Ls, it's time to start. Number 4 is our break-even percentage. And it's break-even, not just our break-even dollar amount. I'm talking our break-even percentage. Right here, this number 12, this 12%. That's our break-even in this particular P&L. How do we know our break-even percentage? We simply take our monthly, our annual overhead expenses. So what is that monthly overhead expense, or what does it equate to in terms of an annual? And then what is our monthly revenue? Because we divide our overhead expense by our monthly revenue or our annual overhead to our annual revenue. And that will give us our break-even percentage. And you'll notice on that last P&L, it was 12%. Here we got 24.5%. Very vastly different break-evens. Vastly different decisions that I need to make on my pricing if I'm ever going to get profitable. The number 5, the 5th thing that is how to calculate our gross profit. If I take a $10,000 cost and I mark it up by 20% here, I'm left with $12,000 sale price. Now that markup in terms of a dollar amount, my markup is $2,000 on that $10,000 cost. So I take that $2,000 markup and I divide it by my actual sale price, and that leaves me with 16.6%. So a 20% markup is the equivalent of 16.6% gross profit. The 30% here, if I had a decimal point, this would be 23.08% gross profit, or a 40% markup's a 28.5. We have to know how to be able to calculate this so we understand the difference between markup and margins. You remember this 24.5% break even. I want to keep that in mind as we move forward into this example. Now, this is a standard way of pricing out a basement reno. We might have materials of $40,000. We might have labor of $45,000. We might have subtrades of $12,500. We might have rental tools on that project for $2,500. At the end of the day, we got a $100,000 cost. What I'm trying to share with you is, let's look at a $100,000 cost, and let's look at what we're typically seeing in the marketplace is 20 to 30% type markups. That this particular job is going to lose money at this 30% markup.
Hey, if you like this video, remember to hit that subscribe button, grab your hammer, and hit the bell so you don't miss any more of these videos.
So let's get into the 7 common mistakes we're going to need to avoid. Number 1, we're pricing with a markup without knowing our overhead. Now, we're likely doing that already, and that's a mistake we have to avoid. We cannot keep using a markup without knowing what our actual overheads are and our overhead percentage, which means I got to know my break even. This is a big one. There always have misallocations in our expenses in our P&L. So our COGS versus our overhead expense, what's in a cost of good compared to an overhead expense? But we have to know where the right allocations are in our P&L if we're going to spit out the right data. If we don't get the data right, we're making decisions based on false information, right? And we cannot have that. So we have to get our allocations proper in our P&L to make any sense of this. One of the things that we also need to avoid doing is project management costs, because we have costs of project management on our teams. If you are the entrepreneur and you are the project manager, and we think to ourselves, well, I don't charge for myself, or I don't charge project management fee at all because it's an overhead. That's not true. We need it as a cost of goods. It's a direct cost to that project. So we have to be charging project management. We also have to be putting project management expenses up in the cost of goods and not in our overhead expense. Because once it's up in cost of goods, I start thinking differently about how I'm going to price this project. And in fact, I have to price in the cost of my project management. We're confusing markup with gross profit because it's based on how we price. We estimate it with a certain markup. Now, will I get the markup out during my project? Will my cost of the project be higher than I estimated? And will my gross profit end up being quite different than the markup or the margin that I thought I was going to get? And then understanding and confusing the fact of thinking about them as numbers and not as percentages is a big mistake we need to avoid. Labor burden, big one. It keeps coming. Labor burden. But what do you pay your labor? What do you pay your skilled guys in the field? Whatever the number is. And what I always ask is, hey, if you pay them 30 or 35 an hour, what do they cost you? Deer in the headlights. Say, well, what do you mean? What does it cost you? I just told you, $30 or 35. So I know that's what you pay them. But what do they cost you? And then we get into the labor burden aspect. Are we allocating for that when we think about what's our true cost of labor? What is the taxes? We're paying employee taxes. We're paying some tax on that number. So a $30 an hour person is likely costing us in the neighborhood of $43.80, or we could look at it as a round figure of 1.5. 1.5 would put us to $45. If you have people in labor in the field, we need to understand the cost of true labor burden. Number 6 is we're not comparing estimates to actuals at the end of a project, because at the end of the day, we're usually too damn busy in our world trying to just keep up with the day-to-day. Look, you run an extremely difficult and complex business. You've got hundreds of moving parts every single day coming at you. And with those hundreds of moving parts, I can promise you what's happening, right? We don't have time to focus on what's going to make a difference in our business, which is making sure that we're comparing our estimates that we thought we were going to have to our actuals after a project or job costing. Are we doing job costing? And if we're not, How do we know that the estimates that we thought we were going to do were actually true? Was our cost of labor far higher? Is it always far higher than we thought and estimated? As material prices creeped up on us and we didn't even realize we're using outdated numbers for our material. So we have to get a grip of that. Let's get to number 7. We're pricing based on false overhead. Now, what do I mean by false overhead? It's overhead that's too low to ever grow the business or be able to build teams. If we're charging based on low overhead, then what will we be able to afford? We will always be able to afford low overhead. We'll never be able to afford the people we need to grow overhead if we don't price for it now, right? We have to price based on the fact that we actually have overhead. If we price based on the fact that we actually have overhead, which we don't, so let's leverage the fact that we don't. Let's make more money in the meantime, but let's compete with the ones that do have overhead so we can actually build some people around us eventually and afford the overhead. 4 ways to increase net profit. There's 2 types of profit. There's gross profit and net profit. I'm talking about bottom line net profit. Gross profit is extremely important, but net profit is what we can put in our pocket eventually. The only 4 ways to increase net profit. This 4x will give you a 10x return on your bottom line. We have a job cost of $100,000, $100,000. I'm going to put a markup of that. Remember that 30% markup, which is a $30,000 markup, right? So we put that $30,000 markup on, which we end up with a sale price of $130,000. Again, this is our example and a starting point. That $130,000 sale price, this is a 23.8% gross profit based on our job costs and based on our markup and our margin. All right, we're left with this 23.8 gross profit. If I understand what my break even is, our break even is our percentage, our bottom line percentage of that overhead expense number compared to our sale. And so in this case, we're going to use the number of 20%. Now, with the break even at 20%, what does that leave us? We had a gross profit of 23.08. We're left with 20% break even. It leaves us with this 3.08%. It's $4,000. So I can promise you, by knowing the numbers, I can predict what you're going to get as an outcome by pricing a job like this with a 30% markup. It's going to leave us with $4,000. Now let's hit it with our first of the 4 ways to increase profit, right? Increase price. Now you might be going, Randy, that's fantastic. Really brilliant. Increase price. Of course, we're going to have a bigger bottom line by increasing price. Well, this is the first starting point and why we share this book with you. You have to be able to find the right client who is willing to pay more, and you have to be able to separate yourself from the competition, and you have to be able to increase that price, and you have to separate yourself for how do you sell that job at a higher price point. So the goal is in how you do that. I just have to be able to increase that price and do it in a way that takes it to the next level. Number 1 thing is increase price, right? So what did it do? We had the same job costs. I'm going to go through this example each step. $100,000 job cost. We have a new markup, right? Because we increased price. We're marking up now $40,000 to a sale price of $140,000. What did it do? It increased our gross profit to 28.57%. So a much higher gross profit. We're using the same break even. We haven't changed our operation. We're still operating at a break even of 20%. Gave us a bottom line net profit of 8.57 because of the increased gross profit from the increase of the sale price. Same break even. We now make $11,998 or $12,000. Number 2 of the second of the 4 ways, right? Increase monthly and annual revenue. Increase monthly and annual revenue. So Randy, if I do more revenue per month than I did last month, what will that do to my number? What I'm going to show you is it's going to decrease your break even. What did I say before? We had to decrease our break even so you can make some more money, right? So if we increase price and we decrease break even by doing more revenue in a given month without increasing our overheads, that's when things start working, right? So we create a business that generates more work at higher price points, and we create a trained team that follows our systems, do the right things right, that can increase volume with the same overhead. Critical to dropping that break even. So what does it do? So we've taken that $100,000 job cost, nothing changed so far. We had that markup that we're now using, right? The $140,000 new sale price. We still have that gross profit of 28.57. But what did we do? We decreased our break even by 5%. By decreasing the break even, what did that do to our bottom line? We still had the same gross profit, but now we're working with a decreased break even. Our overheads are less, right? Because we increased our monthly revenue, it dropped our break even. Now we're operating with a net profit of 13.57, and we went from that last margin of or net profit of 12,000 up to 19,000, 18,998. So we went from 4 to 12 to literally 18,9. So let's get to the next one. Number 3, if we can decrease our monthly and annual overhead expenses in the process of leveraging those first two, and we can do this along the way, and we decrease those overhead expenses during that same month where we increase the amount of work we did, magic starts to happen. And what did it do? It's going to take that break even down even further. So what does it do to the numbers? Different outcome, same cost. Same sale price, 140, same gross profit as we've had the last 2 times now, but our break even came down again, right? We started with 20, we brought it down to 15 to 10. And I promise you, this is where we need to start being. We need to be operating in the 10% range, 15% max. Guys, we help custom builders get down as low as 2 and 3%. Number 4, so we decrease the cost of goods on a job, or the cost of a job. I'm talking about pricing from a number that we know is market value to do a job, to price from with the subcontractors we need, or the labor that we need and the materials that we need. Let's price from that level so that during the job, I can actually decrease the cost of goods sold for that project. So I'm actually doing a better job than what I estimated my cost to be, when I can start thinking about buying in bulk, when I can start thinking of getting discounts by, quick pays, when I can start, having cash in my business to be able to pull this stuff off. So what does it do to our number now, right? This is our 4th of our 4, and this is going to give you the bottom line number total. Is it went from $100,000, now that job's down to 97. I'm using the same pricing. This is me after the fact say, hey, I saved $3,000. It only cost me 97 instead of 100 that I estimated from. So what did it do? It gave us $43,000 markup now, because our sale price was the same. We just made some more money. So what did that do? It increased our gross profit to 30.71%. Now, is this possible? Yes, it's 100% possible. In fact, it's where we want to play, right? So now we have a net profit of 20.71%. We creeped over that 20% range. We're operating optimally. This is ideal, right? Now we're starting to hit the sweet spot, and we're making now 29,000 or 28,994 on this particular project that we originally quoted from a cost of 100K and was only making 4K. We bumped it. Now you might be looking at this and say, Randy, you said you get a 10X on here, and I don't see a 10X. I see 4,000 to 28,900. That is not 10X. So Randy, how do you get to 10X? Well, you get to 10X by doing this and multiplying and starting to grow and scale your business. Because when you have this happening, what happens around you? Now you can afford the people. And it's not just any people. You can afford A players. A players will take your business to another level. And so that's where we get this 4 to 10X when we start doing the right things right. It all starts with understanding our numbers, knowing those first 5 things, avoiding the 7, and multiplying these 4, total game changer.
We got a couple questions here, so let's take a look.
Yeah, let's dive in.
First one here is, if I'm doing small projects between $5,000 and $20,000, will the same pricing formula work for me?
Yeah, 100%. I don't care if you're doing, small projects of that nature, or if you're doing $1 million project. We have to understand our numbers. We have to understand our costs. We have to understand how that all ties in to our bottom line outcome, and if you're doing cost plus, the same thing's going to apply, guys, right? We have to still know what is our loss that we need in order to get a bottom line net profit out that's going to take our business to the next level. All right, so that's critical. Doesn't matter what size.
Can you give examples of how to lower overhead?
We use a tool, we call it our spending assessment tool. And I suggest we do this at least once a year, if not twice a year, is roll through this tool. Those costs exist for a reason, but we also have reducible costs like that. So we have 2 buckets of need, unreducible and reducible. We also have wants, and a lot of our overhead is about wants and things that we have sitting there that I can go and either eliminate altogether or negotiate better pricing. So we need to do an assessment on what we're spending at least once a year, if not twice.
What is the key to get higher paying clients in such a competitive industry?
It's the sales system. It's how you show up. Yes, it is a competitive industry, no question. Most of our competitors are pricing jobs and they do not know how to be profitable or what they should be charging. We've got to say, I need to know what my numbers are. I need to know what I need to charge to make money. And I need to be able to show up and separate myself from the competition with a sales system that does that. Now, our sales system in our book will have 5 secret weapons to closing more deals at higher price points, because those 5 secret weapons set you apart. It builds trust, it builds confidence in you. If you show up and do that, you want your prospect, your future client, to be so fearful of going with anyone else but you that price is no longer an issue if they care about their asset, which is their home.
Will the pricing for profit formula work for me if I'm doing cost plus?
Yes, 100%, right? Often we're doing cost plus depending on the size of the project. It might be, as low as 12% or as high as 15 or maybe even 20%. The fact is if we're doing cost plus or we're using that formula. Now, guys, another big thing on cost plus, please don't be doing cost plus on projects of 100K. That project is not large enough. You can make more money on a fixed price if you understand your world and you do estimates to actual job costing. Our magic number is 500 plus is where cost plus starts to make sense.
Do we use the last year for our numbers or a different time frame?
Oh, I love that. Great question. Our numbers, I like to look at least 3 months back and 3 months forward, because the truth is the work you're going to be doing when you estimate this project is going to be in the future. So where is our future taking us? What's in our pipeline? What do we have in closed deals and contracted work? What is our future bringing and where were we? And let's take that in a combination average an amount. And the truth is, if you have peaks and valleys or seasonalities in your business, then we need to even go back further and make sure we encompass some of that seasonality. Because if we're doing work that's going to run into seasonality, we also have to make sure we encompass that. So there is a broad range of how we look at that number in order to make sense of it, but great question.